The last person anyone expected to find in Brian Moon's Los Angeles mansion was a crying child. It was past 11 p.m. when the Mafia boss returned from enforcing a deal gone wrong. His crew waited in the garage. He entered alone, heading for his study, but then a sound stopped him cold. Not voices. Not footsteps. A muffled sob coming from the kitchen pantry. He moved silently, his hand instinctively reaching for the weapon inside his jacket. Any other night, someone inside his private space meant immediate consequences. Tonight, it meant something far worse. He pulled open the pantry door and froze. There, sitting cross-legged on the cold marble floor, was a little girl. Blonde hair wild around her tear-streaked face. Her blue dress dirty at the hem. In her small hands, she clutched a mangled piece of discarded cake, the kind his chef threw out after his business dinners. She wasn't an intruder. She wasn't sent by rivals. She was starving. And when Brian Moon stepped closer, his shadow falling over her, she looked up with eyes that held more fear than any man he'd ever broken. Then she whispered the words that shattered something inside him he thought was long dead. "Please don't hurt my mommy. She doesn't know I came." His chest tightened. His jaw clenched. Her mother. His maid. The quiet woman who cleaned his blood-soaked floors without question, who worked 16-hour days without complaint, who never once asked for help or spoke about her life beyond these mansion walls. Now he understood why. The girl, Megan, tried to hide the cake behind her back, as if protecting it would somehow protect her mother too. Crumbs fell between her fingers. Her whole body trembled. For a long moment, Brian Moon said nothing. The ruthless boss who'd built an empire across the USA on fear and violence stood in his own pantry, staring at a child who weighed less than his designer suits. Then he slowly removed his hand from his jacket and did something none of his men would ever believe. "Stay with me until the end." Because what he did next left every guard, every enforcer, and every member of the Torino organization absolutely speechless. If you are ready to enjoy this story, click that subscribe button, like this video, and comment where you are watching from. Your support helps us bring more wonderful stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's get into the story. Brian Moon had ruled the American underworld for 15 years. His name was whispered in backrooms from New York to Nevada. He controlled shipping routes, politicians, entire neighborhoods. His Los Angeles mansion stood like a monument to power, with floors of Italian marble, security systems that could protect a president, and art stolen from museums hanging on walls that had witnessed unspeakable things. But standing in that pantry, staring at a child no older than 8 with hollow cheeks and holes in her shoes, Brian felt something crack in his chest, something he'd buried the night he chose blood money over everything else. The girl's name was Megan Allen. He'd never noticed her before, though he realized now she must have been here, hidden, quiet, invisible like her mother. Her mother, Sarah Allen, had worked for him for 2 years. She arrived before dawn and left after dark. She never flinched when his men tracked violence through her freshly cleaned halls. She never asked questions. She was invisible in the way loyal help should be. But this child, shaking in his pantry with cake crumbs on her lips and tears carving tracks down her dirty face, made everything visible. Brian crouched down slowly, his tailored shirt pulling tight across his tattooed shoulders. Megan pressed herself against the shelves, still clutching that piece of ruined cake like it was gold. Up close, he could see everything poverty had done to her. The way her dress hung loose on her thin frame. The dark shadows under her eyes. The desperation that had driven her to risk everything for scraps. "How long have you been doing this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Megan's lips trembled. She couldn't answer. Fear had stolen her voice. Brian tried again, gentler this time, using a tone he didn't know he still possessed. "Megan, right? That's your name." A tiny nod. Her eyes kept darting to the door, calculating if she could escape past him. "Your mama works very hard for me. She's good at her job." He paused, watching the child's face contort with the effort not to cry harder. "Does she know you're here?" Megan shook her head, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. Brian watched as she struggled with whether to speak, her small fingers digging into the cake until it crumbled completely. When she finally found her voice, it came out broken and desperate. "Mommy's sick. Really sick. But she can't stop working because we need the money for her medicine. She doesn't eat anymore. She gives me her food, but it's not enough and I'm so hungry, and she doesn't know I see her crying at night when she thinks I'm asleep." The words tumbled out in a rush, like a dam breaking. Brian felt each one land like a physical blow. He'd seen men tortured, watched empires crumble, orchestrated violence that would haunt normal people for life. But this 8-year-old girl, confessing her mother's slow death in his pantry, unmade him. "What kind of sick?" he asked, keeping his voice steady even as something dark and protective coiled in his chest. "She coughs all the time. Blood sometimes. She's so thin now. The doctor said she needs treatment, but it costs too much money and we don't have insurance, and she said we'd figure it out, but we're not figuring it out. We're just getting worse." Brian's mind raced through the implications. Sarah Allen was dying. She was working herself to death in his mansion to pay for medicine she probably couldn't afford anyway. She was starving herself to feed her daughter. And her daughter was sneaking into his pantry to eat garbage because even that sacrifice wasn't enough. The mathematics of poverty had never been his concern. He dealt in millions, in power, in fear. But here it was, collapsed into a child who weighed maybe 50 pounds, holding cake she'd retrieved from his trash. "Megan, look at me." He waited until her terrified eyes met his. "You're not in trouble. Your mama's not in trouble. You understand." She nodded, but he could see she didn't believe him. Why would she? Men like him didn't show mercy. That's what his reputation was built on. "I'm going to help your mama. But you can't tell her we talked." "Not yet. Can you do that for me?" "Why?" The question was barely a whisper. Because sometimes people are too proud to accept help. And sometimes the people who need help the most are the ones who'll never ask for it. He stood slowly, his knees cracking. Megan flinched at the sound. Brian reached into his pocket and she tensed, but instead of a weapon, he pulled out his phone. He scrolled through his contacts, finding the number for his personal physician, a man who owed him enough favors to show up at midnight without questions. But before he could dial, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Heavy boots on marble. Vinny, his enforcer, checking the premises. Brian's jaw tightened. He had seconds before Vinny reached the kitchen. He looked down at Megan, pressed a finger to his lips, and she shrank back into the shadows. He stepped out, pulling the pantry door mostly closed behind him. "Boss?" Vinny's voice carried from the entrance. "You good? Thought I heard something." Brian kept his body blocking the pantry, his posture relaxed despite his hammering heart. "Just checking the security panel. Motion sensor tripped. Probably a rat." Vinny moved closer, hand resting on his weapon. 12 years together meant the man could smell lies like blood and water. His eyes swept the kitchen, taking in the open pantry door, Brian's defensive position, the tension in his shoulders. "Want me to check it out?" Vinny asked, already moving forward. "I said it's handled." Brian's voice dropped into the tone that ended conversations and lives. Vinny stopped mid-step. The two men stared at each other across the kitchen, and Brian could see the calculations running behind his enforcer's eyes. The boss never checked security himself. The boss never dismissed threats. The boss was acting strange. "You sure everything's all right?" Vinny pressed, concern or suspicion edging his voice. "Are you questioning me, Vinny?" "No, boss. Just making sure. I'm fine. The house is fine. Go tell the boys we're done for the night." Vinny's gaze flickered to the pantry door, then back to Brian. Finally, he nodded. "Whatever you say, boss." Brian didn't move until he heard the front door close, until the cars started outside, until he was certain they were alone. Only then did he release his breath. He opened the pantry door. Megan sat trembling, having stuffed the cake in her mouth, afraid it would be her last chance. Brian crouched down, and when he spoke, there was steel beneath the gentleness. Tomorrow morning, I talk to your mama. But tonight, you're going to let me give you real food. Not scraps. Not trash. Real food. And you're going to eat it in my kitchen like you have every right to be here. Because you do. If you believe people should be treated fairly and poverty is a broken process, hit subscribe, only heartless trolls won't. Sarah Allen arrived at 5:47 a.m., 13 minutes early as always. Brian watched from his study doorway, seeing what he'd never noticed before. The way she gripped her cleaning cart for support. The careful, shallow breaths. The hollowness in her cheeks that matched her daughter's. Sarah. My office. Now. Terror flashed in her eyes, the same look Megan had worn. Her hands trembled as she followed him inside. Brian closed the door and gestured to the chair across from his desk. She remained standing, head bowed, hands clasped like a prisoner awaiting sentence. Sit down, Sarah. Mr. Moon, if I've done something wrong. Sit. She perched on the edge of the chair like she might need to run. Brian studied her properly for the first time. Mid-30s, though poverty and illness had aged her. Dark circles permanent under her eyes. Her uniform hanging loose on a frame that had clearly lost significant weight. When did you last eat a full meal? The question wasn't what she expected. I eat, sir. That's not what I asked. Sarah's composure cracked. Mr. Moon, I don't understand. Your daughter was in my pantry last night, eating garbage. He let the words land like stones. She told me you're sick. That you're dying. That you give her your food and it's still not enough. Color drained from Sarah's face. Megan was here? Oh God, I'm so sorry. Stop. Brian leaned forward. I don't care about the pantry. I care that your 8-year-old is eating trash because you're too proud to ask for help. It's not pride, it's survival. Sarah's voice broke, desperate now. If I ask for more hours, you'll wonder why. If I ask for an advance, you'll think I'm irresponsible. If I tell you I'm sick, you'll replace me. And if I lose this job, we lose everything. Tears streamed down her face, the dam finally breaking. I have stage 2 lung cancer. Treatment costs $18,000. I make $22 an hour. I've been working 70-hour weeks and it's still not enough. So yes, I give Megan my food. Yes, I lie about being fine. Because the alternative is watching my daughter go into foster care when I die, which happens in 6 months without treatment. Her voice shattered completely. So you tell me, what choice was I supposed to make? The silence that followed was absolute. Brian had ordered executions with less emotion than what he felt sitting across from this dying woman who'd scrubbed his blood-stained floors while cancer ate her alive. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the name he wanted. What are you doing? Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. Brian didn't answer. The phone rang twice before a sleepy voice picked up. This better be life or death, Moon. It is. I need you on a plane to Los Angeles. Today. I have a patient who needs immediate evaluation and treatment. Stage 2 lung cancer. No insurance. I don't care what it costs. Dr. Marcus Chin had been the Torino family's personal physician for a decade, treating everything from gunshot wounds to heart attacks without asking questions. Brian, I'm an oncologist, not a miracle worker. Stage 2 lung cancer requires. I know what it requires. Chemo, radiation, probably surgery. You're going to arrange all of it. Discreetly. Bill everything to me personally. Sarah shot to her feet. No. Absolutely not. I can't accept. Brian held up a hand, silencing her while he finished with Chin. I'll have a car pick you up at LAX. For hours. He ended the call and turned his full attention to Sarah, who was shaking her head violently. Mr. Moon, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I can't take charity. I won't be in debt to. This isn't charity. Brian's voice dropped into the tone that had built empires. You work in my house. Your daughter was eating garbage in my house. That makes it my problem. You think I'm going to let one of my employees die on my watch? You think I'm going to let a child starve under my roof? I can't pay you back. I'm not asking you to. He stood, coming around the desk to face her directly. Here's what's going to happen, Sarah. You're going to accept treatment. You're going to get healthy. And you're going to keep working for me, because Megan needs stability and you're good at your job. This isn't negotiable. But the cost. Do you know how much I spent on the chandelier in my foyer? $85,000. For glass and metal that does nothing but hang there. Your life is worth more than a chandelier. Your daughter's future is worth more than my ego. So you're going to sit back down and you're going to say yes, because I'm not giving you another option. Sarah's legs gave out and she collapsed back into the chair, sobbing into her hands. Comment, stop the cycle. If you can't stand Brian Moon's former ruthlessness and believe the powerful should help the vulnerable. Richard Castellano had been the Torino family's attorney for 23 years. He'd helped Brian launder millions, structure shell corporations, and bury evidence that would have put half the organization behind bars for life. But when Brian called him into the mansion at noon with instructions to draft trust fund documents, Richard's carefully maintained composure cracked. Let me make sure I understand correctly. Richard adjusted his glasses, reviewing his notes. You want to establish a medical trust fund with no cap for Sarah Allen's cancer treatment and any future health expenses, plus a separate education trust for her daughter, Megan Allen, fully funded through doctoral level if she chooses, and a third account for living expenses, housing, and general welfare. That's correct. Brian, we're talking about potentially $2, maybe $3 million over the lifetime of these trusts. I'm aware. Richard set down his pen and leaned back, studying his client with the wariness of a man who'd seen empires collapse over smaller decisions. This kind of expenditure, especially for an employee, will raise questions. People will talk. Your competitors, your partners, even your own men, they'll see this as weakness. Let them. You don't understand what I'm saying. Richard's voice hardened. In our world, weakness gets you killed. The families in New York, Chicago, Miami, they're watching you constantly, waiting for any sign that Brian Moon is losing his edge. This kind of charity, it sends a message that you're getting soft, that you're vulnerable. Brian stood and walked to the window overlooking his estate, the perfectly manicured lawns stretching out like a green empire. He thought about the 15 years he'd spent building this. The bodies buried in those lawns. The blood washed off that marble. The fear he'd cultivated like a garden. You know how many people I've killed, Richard? The lawyer shifted uncomfortably. I don't keep count of those things. 17. Personally. With my own hands. Dozens more on my orders. Brian turned from the window. I've broken men who begged for mercy. I've destroyed families. I've built an empire on the principle that fear is the only currency that matters. And you know what all that power got me? Richard said nothing. An 8-year-old girl eating garbage in my pantry because her mother was too terrified to ask for help. That's my legacy. That's what my reputation is worth. Brian's voice was quiet, but absolute. Draft the documents, Richard. If my enemies think compassion makes me weak, let them come. I'd rather die protecting one child than live as the monster who ignored her. Richard picked up his pen. I'll have everything ready by tomorrow. 3 days later, Megan appeared at the mansion service entrance at 3:45 p.m., still wearing her backpack from school. Her eyes were red from crying, and when she saw Brian in the hallway, she ran straight to him. Where's my mommy? Her small hands grabbed his jacket. She didn't pick me up from school. She's always there. Always. Is she dead? Did she die? Brian crouched down, catching her by the shoulders. Your mama is fine. She's at the hospital getting treatment. Remember I told you I was going to help her? That's happening right now. But she didn't tell me. She didn't say goodbye. Because she was scared you'd be scared. But I promise you, Megan, she's going to be okay. He stood, offering his hand. Are you hungry? She nodded, wiping her nose with her sleeve. What Brian did next violated every protocol in his household. The grand staircase, the wide, sweeping marble masterpiece that dominated the mansion's entrance, was off-limits to staff. It was a symbol of power, reserved for Brian, his associates, and important guests. The help use the service stairs, always. That was the rule. Brian led Megan straight to the grand staircase. His head of security, positioned near the door, actually stepped forward. "Boss, the service stairs. Are we having a problem, Marcus?" The man froze, reading the warning in Brian's tone. "No, sir." Brian placed his hand on Megan's back and guided her up the marble steps, past the portraits of men who'd built their fortunes on blood, past the chandelier he'd compared to her mother's life, all the way to the second floor where his private dining room overlooked the city. The chef, Antonio, was prepping dinner when they entered. He looked up in shock, clearly trying to process why a child in a school uniform was standing in the boss's personal space. "Antonio, this is Megan. She's going to eat here tonight and every day after school until her mother's back on her feet. Whatever she wants, you make it. No limits. No scraps. No leftovers. You treat her like she owns this house. Understood?" Antonio nodded quickly. "Of course, boss. Miss Megan, what would you like?" Megan stared at the chef, then at the dining table that could seat 12, then back at Brian with complete disbelief. "Anything? Anything," Brian confirmed. Her voice came out small, hesitant, like she was afraid the offer would vanish. Could I have spaghetti? With meatballs? And maybe garlic bread. Coming right up, miss. Don't let this channel be invisible. Hit subscribe now before the Mafia bosses and haters try to silence this story. Megan ate like she'd been starving for months, which Brian realized she probably had been. She finished the spaghetti, then the garlic bread, then asked shyly if she could have seconds. Antonio brought out enough food for 3 children, his eyes suspiciously wet. When she finally pushed back from the table, too full to take another bite, Brian sat down across from her. The dining room felt enormous around this small girl in her worn school uniform, but she no longer looked quite so terrified. "Megan, I need to tell you something important. While your mama is getting treatment, you're going to stay here. In this house. With me." Her eyes went wide. "Here? In your house?" "Yes. I've already had a room prepared for you. You'll go to school from here, come back here, eat here. This is your home now until your mama is well enough to take care of you again." Megan's face crumpled, and for a moment Brian thought she might cry. Instead, she asked a question that hit him harder than any bullet ever had. "But why? I'm not important." Brian felt those 4 words crack something fundamental in his chest. This child, who should have been worried about homework and friends and toys, had been taught by poverty that she didn't matter. That she was invisible. That her hunger, her fear, her very existence was an inconvenience to be hidden away. He stood and moved around the table, kneeling beside her chair so they were eye to eye. When he spoke, his voice was gentle but carried the absolute authority of a man who'd commanded an empire. "Megan Allen, look at me. You are the most important person in this house right now. Not my associates. Not my business partners. You. Every single person who works here, everyone who walks through that door, they answer to me. And I'm telling them that you matter. That you're not a burden. That you're not invisible." Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't look away. "Your mama matters. You matter. And anyone who has a problem with that can answer to me personally. Do you understand what I'm saying?" She nodded, her small voice breaking. "I'm not invisible anymore?" "No, sweetheart. You're not invisible anymore. You never should have been." Megan launched herself from the chair into his arms, sobbing into his shoulder. Brian held her, this tiny girl who weighed nothing, and felt the weight of every terrible thing he'd ever done shift slightly. Not erased. Not forgiven. But maybe, just maybe, balanced by this one act of choosing right over power. Like this video if you think Megan should stay in the mansion and comment, "I stand against poverty." The whispers started within a week. Brian Moon had gone soft. The ruthless boss who'd built an empire on fear was keeping a child in his mansion, playing house while his enemies circled like sharks. In New York, the Castellano family laughed over cigars. In Miami, the Reyes cartel made jokes about Brian's retirement. Even his own men exchanged uncertain glances when they thought he wasn't looking. Vinny brought him the reports during their weekly meeting, laying out the intelligence with careful neutrality. The families think you're vulnerable, boss. They're testing our territories, pushing boundaries. Word is you've lost your edge. Brian stood at his office window, watching Megan play in the garden below. She was throwing a ball for one of the guard dogs, laughing when it knocked her over with enthusiastic licks. A sound he'd never heard in this house before, pure, uncomplicated joy. And what do you think, Vinny? His enforcer was quiet for a long moment. I think the man who took out the Moretti family in one night isn't someone I'd bet against, soft or not. Brian smiled slightly. Good answer. The truth was, he'd been reviewing his life in the quiet hours after Megan went to bed. 15 years of power. Millions in assets. Properties across 3 countries. Respect built on bodies and fear. And at the end of it all, what did he have? Empty rooms in a mansion that echoed with ghosts. Associates who'd turn on him the moment he showed weakness. A legacy written in blood that would be forgotten within a generation. Then he thought about Megan asking if she was important. The way her face had lit up when Antonio made her pancakes shaped like Mickey Mouse. How she'd hugged him goodnight and whispered, "Thank you for saving my mommy." Sarah's surgery had been successful. Dr. Chin called it a miracle, though Brian knew it was just what money could buy when you had enough of it. The tumor was removed, the cancer in remission, but the recovery would take months. Chemotherapy, radiation, physical therapy. Sarah would need every resource he could provide. Brian left his office and climbed the stairs to the guest wing, now Megan's wing. Her door was cracked open, a night light glowing softly inside. She slept curled up with a stuffed bear Antonio's wife had brought her, her face peaceful in a way it hadn't been that first night in the pantry. She trusted him. This child who had every reason to fear powerful men had placed her entire world in his hands. The weight of that trust was heavier than any empire. 6 months passed like a quiet revolution. Sarah's hair grew back after the chemo, shorter and silver-streaked, but her eyes held life again. Dr. Chin declared her in full remission, and Brian promoted her to head of household staff with a salary that made her cry. She'd tried to refuse, citing charity again, until Brian reminded her that good management was hard to find, and he didn't make business decisions based on sentiment. They both knew he was lying. Neither of them cared. Megan had transformed entirely. The hollow-cheeked girl who'd eaten garbage now had color in her face, muscle on her bones, and a laugh that echoed through the mansion like music. She dominated the dinner table with stories from school, dragged Brian to parent-teacher conferences, and had somehow convinced his entire security team that tea parties were a legitimate use of their time. On a Saturday afternoon in May, she came into his study carrying a piece of construction paper, her fingers stained with marker. "I made this for you." Brian set down the financial report he'd been reviewing and took the drawing. It showed 3 stick figures standing in front of a large house. A woman labeled Mommy, a small girl labeled Me, and a tall figure with what appeared to be tattoos, labeled Brian. Above them, in careful block letters, My Family. Something broke open in Brian's chest. He stared at that drawing, at the way she'd included him without hesitation, without qualification. Not Mommy's boss. Not the man who helped us. Just family. "Do you like it?" Megan asked, suddenly uncertain. Brian pulled her into a hug, holding the drawing carefully so it wouldn't crumple. "I love it. It's perfect." That night, after Megan went to bed, Brian called Richard Castellano. "I need you to draft adoption papers." Silence on the other end. Then, carefully, for Megan Allen? "Yes. Full legal adoption. I want every right, every protection, every benefit that comes with being my daughter. And I want Sarah Allen as co-guardian with full parental rights. Can you make that happen? Brian, have you thought about what this means? For your organization, your reputation. I've thought about nothing else for 6 months. The families want to test me? Let them come. I've built one empire on fear. Maybe it's time I build a different kind of legacy. One that matters. He looked at Megan's drawing, now pinned to the wall above his desk where he could see it every day. 3 stick figures. 1 family. His true power had never been in destruction. It had been waiting all along in protection, in choosing love over fear, in believing that one small girl's drawing was worth more than all the blood money in the world. If you agree that Brian Moon's redemption is powerful, hit the subscribe button. Only those who stand for evil will refuse to join this community.